Hello to everyone. First of all, before we start with the conference, I want to thank the Canto University and the Traditional Chinese Medicine Department for organizing this conference and also to have the opportunity to join this conference. I am Professor Henry Tarazon. I am a graduated from the Traditional Chinese Medicine University in Tianjin, China. And currently I work in the institute called CITCM in Canada. So today I'm going to bring a really interesting topic. We only have 20 minutes, but it's going to be enough to have a little bit of conception of the topic that I'm going to talk about. We're going to talk about of one of the most important techniques of tuina, that is abdominal tuina massage. And inside of the abdominal tuina massage, we're going to talk about a specific school of tuina massage that is known as the Jingu Viscera tuina technique or the Jingu Viscera tuina abdominal massage. So this technique or this school of tuina basically is based in the city of Tianjin and is being practiced for more than 6 generations in China, and is being passed to me through my mentor, Professor Wang Jingwei. So today I'm going to introduce a little bit about this interesting technique or this tuina abdominal massage techniques and how they work to treat different types of diseases, not only related with digestive disorders, but also with a lot of disorders that can happen in the body. So first of all, in order to understand why by doing a massage or doing tuina in the abdominal area can treat different types of techniques, we have to first understand the connection that we have with the brain and our gut or intestines. So in Western medicine, a lot of different doctors and a lot of different researchers, they have been studying this connection between the gut and the brain. And in traditional Chinese medicine, they of course didn't know exactly with scientific methods that there was a direct connection, but they find out more than 2,000 years ago that by doing acupuncture, doing massage on this specific area, basically had a direct impact on the brain. So there is a direct connection between your gut and your brain. So in order to understand this connection, we have to know that our gut itself, so here all of abdominal region, is an enteric nervous system. So what is the meaning of that? The meaning of this is that basically our gut is independent. So it's independent to what? It's independent to the brain. So all the gut nervous system basically works by itself and it can regulate by itself without any help from the brain. And this makes a really interesting, let's say, phenomenon in the clinical practice, because at the end of the day, a lot of researchers have been realized that a lot of diseases that we have in the body that, for example, for instance, in the past, a lot of people used to think they were related with the brain. They are not as directly with the brain, but they're more related with the gut because of this connection. Besides that enteric nervous system that we are talking about, that independent nervous system, our gut also has what we call the microbiota. So basically there is millions and millions of different microbiotes in our gut. And at the end of the day, these microbiotes, they coexist with our body. In order to do what? In order to protect our body, in order to improve our immune system, and in order to prevent different types of diseases. And then finally, there is a direct connection. So in the clinical practice is being found out, and this also helps us to understand why by doing abdominal massage we can treat a lot of different diseases, is because basically this enteric nervous system that is in our gut and all this microbiota is directly connected to the brain. So it's connected to the brain through two specific things. The first thing is the vagus nerve. That is one of the most important nerves in the body that at the end of the day help to regulate a lot of the functions of the body. And the second way the gut and the brain communicate to each other is through the circulation. So the circulation through the abdominal aorta. So thanks to these, let's say, two pathways, at the end of the day, we are able to treat different types of diseases by stimulating the gut, because by stimulating the gut, it's going to have a direct impact on the brain. So this is basically how this technique work. And we're going to talk a little bit about this new research and or microbiota and how this type of microbiota is directly related with different types of diseases. So, according to the new research that has been published since the 90s, as I mentioned early on, a lot of researchers realized that the microbiota is something that it develops over time. And the best, let's say, the most ideal microbiota that someone will have is during our adult life. Okay, so at the end of the day, all our microbiota is going to diversify and is going to be all stable. So you notice here that basically we have a baby stage and a severe stage. But I mean, what is the relation and why I'm talking about the development of the microbiota? So at the end of the day, these actually help us to understand why a lot of neurological disorders are directly related with what? With babies or with children and with senior patients. And that's basically the really importance of this type of techniques. So at the end of the day, with a lot of research that has been going on, they realized that basically with a low diversity of microbiota, basically we are more prone to develop neurological disorders or neurodegenerative disorders. So at the end of the day, in children, there is a lot of different types of diseases like autism, IBS. We also have hyperactive disorder, ADHD, and you notice in elderly patients we're going to have other type of disorders like Alzheimer, dementia, Parkinson, and the list goes and goes. So of course, if we start to see in modern time more and more adult people, like people that are on this range, are starting to get sick, and the reason for that is the diet, and the diet that at the end of the day has a direct impact on our microbiota. So there is a couple of factors that at the end of the day are going to affect our microbiota, and of course, if our microbiota is affected, as we were mentioning, that is going to have a direct impact on a lot of disorders, especially neurological disorders that can happen in a patient. So one of those factors, as I mentioned early on, is the diet, and also other factors that can contribute to this type of condition is the emotions, in this kind of case, the stress. So a lot of, as I mentioned early on, a lot of research also have been proving that people that are under lots of stress, they also tend to develop a lot of type of disorders. So for example, right now in modern society, there is some diseases like IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, or chronic fatigue syndrome, CFR, that at the end of the day, they have a direct connection with what? With emotions, with the diet, with our gut, and at the end of the day, they have a direct impact on our brain. So, understanding this helps us to understand all the diseases that can come from basically having, let's say, a poor microbiota. And this also helps us to understand the role of our microbiota. So basically, if, as you see here in the chart, one of the most important roles of our microbiota, and I also mentioned before, is to basically help to keep our body healthy. It helps for our metabolic function, and it's not only the metabolic function of the, let's say, the digestive system, but also metabolic function that has to do also with the brain. So our gut helps to produce a lot of chemicals, including dopamine, that at the end of the day they're going to end up in the brain, and they're going to help us to keep a healthy brain. And besides that, as we mentioned, someone that is not having a good, let's say, lifestyle, or let's say someone that is having a really poor microbiota, at the end of the day is going to be more prone to develop different types of diseases and different types of disorders. In this case, we have some examples. So the first disorders that we're going to have are going to be digestive disorders, the example of IBS. We also have issues like neurological disorders, Parkinson, and so on. And we have also, for example, issues related with depression, anxiety, etc., etc. So at the end of the day, The abdominal massage, that is what I'm going to talk about today, have a really big scope of practice in the clinical practice because not only can help us to treat digestive issues, but also a lot of neurological and psychiatric disorders that we can find in the clinical practice. So, right now, in the following minutes, I'm going to introduce a little bit about the Jingu visceral abdominal twina, and we're going to talk a little bit about the application of twina visceral massage, not in a CFS therapy. We're going to actually talk a little bit about a disorder that calls spasmodic torticollis. So we're going to talk about those two topics. So let's talk a little bit about the Jingu Sanfo twina. So I'm not going to give too much introduction because we only have 20 minutes. So maybe in a future class we're going to discuss more in detail. But early on in the presentation I was mentioning that basically in traditional Chinese medicine tradition, they have been doing abdominal massage for more than 2,000 years, and they know the benefits that abdominal massage have to the body. So there is a really interesting character, that is this character that we have here. This character in Chinese is known as Ji. And the interesting thing is that when they analyze the Asian character of this specific character that I'm showing here, we actually get this. And a lot of researchers of course, characters, philologists have been concluded that this character actually represents what? Represents someone. So there is a person here rubbing someone else's belly, okay, or doing a massage on someone else's belly. On where? On a table. In order to what? To treat diseases. So that's why it's so interesting that this type of techniques have been in traditional Chinese medicine for a long time. So you also have to know that the abdominal massage, like twin abdominal massage, it's a really big scope into basically twin techniques. And at the same time, there is different schools of twin massage that at the end of the day, they emphasize in different types of things. So we have the school from Tianjin, the school from Hubei, Shanxi, Henan, and Hebei. The school that I'm going to talk about, and is basically the school that I follow, is the school from Tianjin. And that's why our school of twina calls Jingu twina. And at the end of the day, our school emphasizes on the treatment of neurological disorders such as depression, spasmodic torticollis, chronic fatigue syndrome, IBS, fibromyalgia. So a lot of neurological issues. Or school of thought basically emphasize that. And our school of thought also makes a really strong emphasis on the connection between the gut and the brain. And we basically focus on stimulate those two pathways that we were talking early on, that is or abdominal aorta and or vagus nerve. Okay, so a interesting thing about our technique, as already mentioned, is that we can treat neurological disorders. Okay, there is a lot of different things that we can talk about the technique, but as I mentioned, there is not too much time to talk about it, so we're not going to emphasize too much. But at the end of the day, our technique is also one of the most traditionals because at the end of the day, it follows the Yellow Emperor. That is basically the classic of the Yellow Emperor, that is our classic of Chinese medicine. And in the classic of Chinese medicine, basically they explain that in order to do this type of techniques, you have to do the technique on the Zhong meridian. That at the end of the day is our same abdominal aorta. So basically our technique is going to emphasize on pressing the abdominal aorta. So the idea of our technique, one of the parts of our technique is to basically give pressure to this region here, that is the abdominal aorta, and also where the vagus nerve is located, and press on that area. And by pressing, is going to help us to create more pressure, and also is going to help us to do what? Is going to help us to promote circulation in the aorta, and by promoting that circulation is going to help us to do what? Is going to help us to transport all those chemicals that are produced in our gut and make sure that those chemicals they get to our brain. So in that way, our brain will be healthy. So basically, that's the idea of our school of thought. And that's basically what we try to do. So we have here, this is one of the most characteristic techniques that we have in our school that is known as the pressing technique, Zong and Fa. So I think I have a short video here, just give me 1 second. I'm going to try to play it. So there we have it. Okay. So I was saying that it's not the only technique that we have in our school of thought. We still have different types of techniques, but because we don't have like a lot of time, and this is more like an introduction for you to have kind of like more knowledge on what are techniques that in the clinical practice. We're not going to introduce too much, but then I'm going to show you here some videos of our techniques as well. Okay, so let me show you here. Okay, so right now let's talk about a little bit about the application of twin abdominal massage on the treatment of, as I mentioned, there is a disorder that causes spasmodic torticollis. So what is a spasmodic torticollis? So at the end of the day, spasmodic torticollis is a disorder that is really common. It's a neurological disorder that is really common on people between 40 to 50 years old. So one of the reasons why people develop spasmodic torticollis is directly related with the stress. So what will happen is like a lot of people after having periods of like basically lots of stress and having periods of being, for example, having too much emotions together, they develop this disorder. So what is the spasmodic torticollis? At the end of the day, the patient doesn't have control on the muscles of the neck. So as you can see here on the picture there, the patient will start to twist their neck and they're going to have this type of involuntary movements. So you have to notice that this is not a technique related with the muscles. So a lot of Western medicine, basically what they will do to these kind of patients is that they will directly inject Botox to basically help to, let's say, relax the muscles. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really work. So these type of patients, they will basically go again and again, and they will become recurrent, and they will continue having these symptoms. So we have to know that this is a disorder that is mostly neurological, and at the end of the day, we have to treat it like a neurological disorder. And here is where our technique of abdominal massage and the theory that we have been talking, that connection between our gut and our brain, is directly related. Okay, so at the end of the day, this was a case that we have in the hospital, in the traditional Chinese medicine hospital of Tianjin, the first affiliated hospital. So as you can see here, this was a 43-year-old female patient, and then she started to have this type of tremors, and then she came basically for treatment after she tried different types of techniques, including Botox, okay, botulinum toxic or Botox. So what happened? She didn't have any results, and then she came to our department here at Tianjin. And after 4 weeks of treatment, the patient, this is basically a before and after with this patient. So what happened is, like, after that, the patient didn't have any contractions, involuntary contractions on her neck, and basically the patient was treated successfully. We have another case of another patient that you can see here. Here on the right picture, we have my mentor, Wang Jingwei. But you can see this one. This was another case of a foreign student. So he was a Chinese nationality person, but he was studying abroad. And what happened is that he was doing an experiment in a lab, and then what happened is like there was a little explosion, and because of the explosion, this patient started to get really scared and really afraid. So he started to have a lot of stress about his studies, and then after a few months, he started to develop the torticollis. So as again, it was a neurological issue. The patient was not able to control the movements of the neck, and same thing, after treating this patient for 4 weeks, this is a before and after. So the way we treat this patient was with abdominal massage, by stimulating the abdominal aorta, by stimulating vagus nerve, and also we combine this with Chinese medicine. So at the end of the day, for conclusion and to wrap up with the presentation for the people that are interested, I'm going to give you some tips, and also I'm going to suggest you some books that you can read directly related with this topic. So at the end of the day, how we can improve our brain and gut connection in order to avoid these kind of disorders. Because of course, remember that if your microbiota is strong, at the end of the day, the possibility for you to have, or the incidence for you to have neurological issues is going to be lower than in people that have a lower microbiota. So at the end of the day, there is a couple of suggestions that we made to patients and also to people in general to have a more healthy life. So the first thing is to try to eat more fermented food and more probiotics. So for example, fermented food, we have things like kimchi, sauerkraut, natto. So in different cultures, they have different types of fermented food. So fermented food is really good for your microbiota because at the end of the day, it helps to develop more microbes in your intestines. Second thing, eat food with probiotics. So at the end of the day, things like yogurts, cheese, wine, things that basically have bacteria, that is good bacteria for our body. Second thing that we should try to avoid is basically cut down the fat in the diet. So it doesn't mean that we're not going to be able to eat red meat, but basically try to avoid to eat too much fats. So this is pretty interesting because the research that is been going on, it has been shown that the fat at the end of the day affects directly our microbiota, and the way that we can actually see it in modern times is that before the 70s in Japan, before Japan basically was modernized, and then they start to, let's say, bring a lot of the American culture into their culture. Basically in Japan, not a lot of people were eating a lot of fat in their diets, and their diet was mostly fish before, and there was mostly a lot of fermented food. But what happened? Once the diets from American people started to get to Japan and they started to consume more fat, they realized that in terms of epidemiology, they started to realize that a lot of neurological conditions that were not there in the Japanese population started to appear. So a lot of conditions like Alzheimer, dementia, they increase because of this. So there is a direct connection. The third advice here is to basically avoid processed food. So processed food is not good because at the end of the day, it has a lot of additives that is going to have a direct impact on our microbiota. Of course, getting organic food is the best thing because at the end of the day, a lot of food that is not organic has a lot of pesticides, and these type of pesticides at the end of the day, they have a direct impact in our microbiota and they can affect our microbiota. Also, eating smaller meals, so not getting too full. In Chinese, basically, they have a saying that says "get full 70%, 七分饱." And also, it's super important in terms of, for example, if you're planning to have a baby, make sure that the person that is pregnant have really mindful prenatal nutrition. So at the end of the day, make sure that the person that is pregnant is eating a wide variety of food, fermented, organic, because at the end of the day, that also is going to have a direct impact on the baby and the future microbiota that this baby will have. And at the end of the day, also meditation is super important because this is going to help us to deal with our emotions, with stress, and at the end of the day, it's also one of the indices, or one of the causes, basically, for this type of disorders. So here to finish my presentation, There is a book that I would like to suggest everyone to read. It's really easy reading. And basically, this is from Dr. Emeron Meyer. Dr. Emeron Meyer is been researching the gut and the mind connection for more than 30 years. And in his book, basically, he talked in more detail about these connections and all these chemical processes that are produced in our gut and how it directs connectly with the mind. Okay, so thank you very much for being here today. I really appreciate everyone for attending the conference, and if you have questions, please let us know. Yeah, and maybe in the near future we will have more opportunity to talk in more detail about this stuff. Thank you.